Streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and blasttheradio.com, this is The Lowell Green Show. The number to call and be heard around the world is 613-413-2217. Or email Lowell at blasttheradio.com. And now, here is Lowell Green.
I need a little help here. I need a lot of help. My wife would certainly agree with that. Is there anybody who can explain to me why about 90% of all executives in the public service deserved a bonus of about $190 million? Why would anybody in the public service deserve a bonus? Would it be for the wonderful way that the airports were administered? Well, gee, I kind of doubt that. Well, you never know. How about the way the passport offices have been operating? Long lineups, you say? No bonus there? Would it be for the incredible job we did in rescuing our workers from Afghanistan? What workers, you ask? Damn good question. Maybe it's the bonuses are for the magnificent manner in which we've helped out Ukraine. Sent them 2 of our 4 howitzers. Maybe it's the way that we help to provide energy for Europe during the Ukraine war. No, you say we didn't provide any help to Europe. I know. It's probably the manner in which the federal government has financed our healthcare system in this country. Oh, you say there are 20-hour... Do you know that there are now 20-hour wait periods at some of our hospitals? 20 hours in the emergency ward? At CHEO, parents being told to bring blankets and sleeping bags for kids because they may be there for hours to get admitted in emergency. So I asked the question again. How in the hell did almost 90% of all public service executives get bonuses totaling nearly $190 million? And by the way, thousands of other lower grade public servants also got performance bonuses. So if there's anybody out there, anybody who can explain the rationale behind this, I'd sure like to hear it. 305,000 additional federal public servants hired during the pandemic, while almost all private industry was either shutting down or cutting back or going bankrupt. By the way, don't tell me that, it's the magnificent manner in which the federal government handled the sale of marijuana. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but it's pretty hard to lose money selling marijuana. But somehow or other, this federal government managed to do it. We lose money. The federal government loses money on the sale of marijuana. So I don't know, where would we be paying bonuses for what? By the way, the bonuses total an 11% increase from last year. Oh, well, what the hell? Some people are doing well, no question about that. So if you got any ideas on that, I'd sure like to hear. Some of you people may have an inside bit of knowledge here. What justification could there possibly be to give almost 90% of public service executives a huge bonus totaling almost $190 million? On another topic, for several years, I did the marketing, the advertising for a wonderful local operation called SunTech Tomatoes. Little Miracles, Manotick. That was my invention, actually, that phrase, and it sold millions of tomatoes. Delicious tomatoes. Anybody who's ever had a Suntec tomato knows how delicious they are. So the the owners did a great job out there. Just ordinary people scraped together money, mortgaged everything they had, put together this greenhouse. It's a huge greenhouse, well over an acre, just perfectly run. He's even got his own bees in there to pollinate inside. One of the things that they discovered is that CO2, that's carbon dioxide, the so called global warming gas, is a magnificent fertilizer for plants. It's one of the reasons why actually the world's forests are growing. I don't know if you knew this or not, but actually from 10 years ago, there's about the size of the state of Texas increase in the number of trees on the planet. The planet's trees are growing thanks to CO2. So at any rate, they discovered at the greenhouses, in Manotick, by the way, that CO2 inside helps the plants to grow. You know what it meant? It meant that they had to use less chemical fertilizer. Oh, CO2. Now, the CO2 doesn't escape the greenhouse. It's captured there. It's all used by the plants. It's a fertilizer. Means they don't have to use quite as much chemical fertilizer. You would think this would be a good thing, and it is a good thing. But guess what? Trudeau has a look at this and says, wait a minute, you're releasing CO2. You got to pay carbon tax on the CO2. But wait a minute, hold it. This is a fertilizer. It's not being escaped out into the atmosphere. It's used to grow the plant. Doesn't matter. You're emitting CO2. So on goes a healthy, very hefty carbon tax. Every little bit of CO2 they release in the greenhouses at Manotick, Suntec, carbon tax. So what's the consequence of this? Well, one of the consequences, and by the way, this was raised in the House of Commons yesterday very eloquently by Pierre Poilievre. He went through the whole Suntec story and explained how the carbon tax was actually contributing to global warming. Here's why. Because of the carbon tax, the added cost of producing tomatoes in Manotick, it means that very often, not every time, but very often, it is cheaper to buy tomatoes grown in Mexico and shipped all the way from Mexico to Manotick. It's cheaper to buy Mexican grown and shipped tomatoes than it is to buy tomatoes grown in Manotick, thanks to the carbon tax. So how does this help the environment? Keep in mind, these are grown in conditions that are much more polluted than we are here. God knows what they use for fertilizer in Mexico. So not only that, but they've got to be loaded aboard trucks, in some cases trains, and shipped all the way up here to Manotick. What kind of emissions do you think that creates? Considerable. Many of those trucks are diesel, pumping out diesel fumes all the way from Mexico. Have a look at the distance. All the way from Mexico here with tomatoes. They land them in Manotick, and they can be sold very often cheaper than tomatoes grown in Manotick, thanks to Pierre Trudeau. How about Justin Trudeau? And carbon tax. And you know, I told this story 2 or 3 days ago to a couple of real determined environmentalists, lefties of the first order, nice people, but so far involved in this environmental movement. I explained all of this to them. I said, look, this is crazy. I mean, you're compelling or encouraging people to buy tomatoes grown in Mexico and shipped all the way here by diesel trucks rather than buy tomatoes grown in Manotick. How can that be good for the environment? They just stared at me blankly. Simply could not get through the fog of environmentalism. They could not understand the point I was trying to make. I went through it again, and they just, you could see their eyes glaze over. But that's the fact, folks. There's an example there's an example of where the carbon tax is discouraging locally grown products and encouraging us to buy foreign grown products. Carbon tax in the West increases the cost of almost all kinds of foods. Huge carbon tax to dry the wheat. That increases the cost. But the carbon tax in the case of Suntech encourages us to buy foreign grown products rather than those grown in our own backyard. I'd like one environmentalist anywhere to explain the benefits of that. I would give them all the time in the world. I promise. I'll give you all the time in the world to explain the benefits of the carbon tax, particularly as it applies to tomatoes. I just shake my head. And as I say, yesterday, Pierre raises this question, the whole story in the House of Commons, and the Liberals, they just sit there, same, blank stares. Oh well, so you can buy tomatoes grown in Mexico cheaper. So what? That's the Liberal attitude. And the NDP. That's the NDP. John, any reaction to this point?
Yes, indeed. I don't understand why we are not celebrating and rewarding people who can make food for us in our own backyard and get it to us. I mean, that is exactly what we need to be doing. Self-sustainability. This is such a fascinating thing. And I remember your commercials for Suntech tomatoes, and I know exactly where they are. I used to have my boat out at Hearst Marina, and you can see their operation just on the opposite side of the river road. It's fantastic. And why we're not rewarding a local business for this is beyond me. All right, some of the comments on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, etc. Ray says, your buddy Evan Solomon said they were cheaper because labor is cheaper in Mexico.
Well, labor may be cheaper in Mexico. It probably is, yeah. But it was what's really been the not the death knell, but certainly is harming very seriously, is the carbon tax. See, Evan Solomon, a typical left wing, they just simply will not admit ever that the carbon tax in many instances is actually harming the environment. Go ahead, please.
It's funny, that whole argument about labor being cheaper in Mexico is the first thing that popped into my mind as I was listening to you speak earlier. Let's go to Melissa on YouTube. She says, tonight's debate on climate change. So this is the local candidates debate. Tonight's debate on climate justice is being totally censored. The moderator is reading the questions and picking which questions get read. I've been at every debate and asked every time, or asked a question every single time. And she says, have a talk with Tom Harris. Tom, in fact, did email us about this very thing, that they are picking and choosing the questions to answer.
Yeah, it's a censored meeting. They say they want public opinion, but they screen out any opinion that they don't want to hear. It's typical left-wing tactic. Go ahead.
Get the soundbite. That's all that matters, right? Get that soundbite that goes out there. Kelly says, buying locally is both economically and good for our environment. We should encourage, not tax this. Rick says, to understand the climate lunacy, follow the rivers of wealth being redirected in its name. Lynn is having a conversation with Ray. I will ignore that and let you two carry on. Sean says, nothing to...
folks, don't do that. Okay,
no, it's okay. Sean says, nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with spreading the wealth to poor countries. Suntech tomatoes are absolutely the best. How exactly do they know which CO2 comes from a tomato? Patricia asks. Does it fly around with a sign on it saying Suntech tomatoes?
That's...
I don't.
Wait a minute. I don't think that person understands the point here. CO2 is a fertilizer used by plants. The more CO2, the more the plants enjoy it. It's a fertilizer, and that's what they're doing at the Suntech greenhouses. They're releasing CO2, and I mean, it's easy to get CO2. When you open up a can of pop, that fizz, that's CO2 coming out. Okay, so they release CO2 in the greenhouse as a fertilizer for the tomato plants. It stays in the greenhouse because it's being used by the plants. Nonetheless, Trudeau says, no, you got to pay carbon tax on it. And it penalizes locally grown produce. Go ahead.
613-413-2217 is the number. You can call the show. You can text the show, and someone has done just that. Lowell, these liberals don't want us to have an economy. They just want us to buy foreign oil and produce produce grown in sewage. That way, they can say the carbon is not created by Canada.
Well, actually, I'm glad you raised that because, yeah, it's the environmentalists who insist that about 1/3 of all the oil and gas that we use in this country is foreign rather than local. In other words, and the environmentalists say they prefer oil produced in Saudi Arabia or Iran or Russia. They prefer that over oil that we have in Alberta and Saskatchewan. That's what the environmentalists say. And in this case, they're saying we prefer tomatoes grown in Mexico rather than tomatoes grown right here in Manotick. That's what the environmentalists are saying. Sorry, but have a look at the facts, folks. Don't dance around. This is what's happening. Go ahead.
YouTube, Dennis says, Trudeau going after farmers is exactly what Lenin and Mao did. We are going to be heading for some very hard times if we don't change our leadership. Dominic says, Trudeau carbon tax has done nothing to reduce the carbon emissions, and they are now planning to increase it in January. They keep saying they will double the rebate during tax season. But on the other hand, inflation rate will keep increasing even more on everything that we buy. Absolutely absurd, Lowell. The logic of this government, says Kelly Ann. Craig says, why, you ask? Because Justin is buying their votes with raises regarding the public service directors getting the big bonuses.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me. What do you think, in all seriousness?
And did you say they got bonuses the previous year as well?
Oh, yeah, every year. The bonus this year is about 11% higher than it was last year, but $190 million going out. And that's just for the executives. I don't think we'll ever find out the amount of money that has been paid out in bonuses to people at lower levels. The fact of the matter is that the great bulk of people in the public service not only are very well paid with wonderful benefits, but they get performance bonuses, whether there's performance or not. I mean, can you imagine even the people running the passport offices would line up? We all know the people administering our airports. They're all getting performance bonuses. The people that were charged with bringing Afghanistan refugees here to rescue the people who had worked for us, they're getting, and we know what that terrible screw up there. They're getting performance bonuses. Remember, just to take you back, just to give you one example. Remember, there was a plane. There, people were desperate in Afghanistan to get out, okay, because the Taliban was coming in.
Yep.
And we had a large plane there that could accommodate, I think, about 400 people. They would put only, I think, what was it, 40 people, because they only had enough seatbelts for 40 people.
Exactly.
Remember that story? That those people who administered that, they got a performance bonus. You can be sure. Go ahead.
Based on that, I can only say that the performance bonuses that were available to me in the private sector are significantly different than those available in the government. Lowell, wouldn't you agree? Boy, oh boy. Suntech says, Eric, Suntech issue just touching the tip of the iceberg. Manufacturing taxes have driven out many high-paying jobs across the country, and that's Poilievre's point. Suntech's just an example of that, happens to be in his backyard. Michelle says, unfortunately, there are too many people in Ontario and Quebec who agree with the Liberals. That's why they keep winning elections. Those of us in the West just don't count. To YouTube, John says, life wouldn't or could not exist without carbon dioxide. Next, they'll be taxing water vapor. Murray, you want there? Go ahead.
No, it's just, actually, the left continually needs some grave crisis in order to convince us that only they can rescue us. It was acid rain. It was global cooling a number of years ago. Then it was acid rain. Then there was the ozone that was close. We were all going to have, 4 heads. It just goes on and on and on. And now they're talking about water scarcity and stuff. I mean, the fact of the matter is as much water on the planet today as there was with the day the planet was created. I mean, the water is here. Aside from, I don't know, anything that they may have left on the moon, it's the same amount of water that we've always had here. Go ahead, please.
To Facebook, and Kellyanne says, I want to address the migrant workers' wages compared to those who work from Mexico. I do realize there's a difference, but by how much?
This is the issue of, there's a difference in pay. There's a difference in pay in the United States. There's no question about it.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that the cost of living is a hell of a lot higher in Canada than it is in Mexico as well. But that's not the issue here. The issue is the fact that they're applying a carbon tax to a locally grown product, which in many cases means that you can buy a foreign grown product cheaper than you can buy a local grown product. That's just fact. Go ahead.
Here's a comment from Chrissy. She says, the best steaks are at Shields with a side of Suntech tomato, she says. Thank you, Chrissy. Chrissy, the honorary show producer today. Go ahead.
I'm talking about Shields. I've got to get a word in here for them. They do not sell tomatoes at Shields. They do have a little butcher shop, a great little butcher shop, local. Once again, if you're talking about local, you can't get more local than Shields. Same family, same location, same business since 1947. Same family. Grandfather, father, and now the son. And the butcher shop, it's a great little butcher shop. They have only locally grown meat, poultry, pork, etc., etc. But by locally I don't mean like local from Alberta. I'm talking about local in the Ottawa Valley. So if you really believe in shopping local, there Suntech tomatoes and Shields Butcher Shop and Shields Appliances. No matter what you want, folks, very good finance plans as well. Shields.ca. Give them a try. Give them a try. Go ahead, John.
613-413-2217 is the number. I've not had a chance to screen the call, but a call coming in from Canada. Can we get your name, please?
Yeah, hi, it's Paul calling from Canada.
Hello, Paul. Welcome back, sir. Welcome back.
Yeah, hi, Lowell.
Yeah.
Just calling in regarding the tomatoes, and I think they kind of fall into this. What I see is kind of a degraded level of discussion around this whole climate change and what we're doing about it.
What do you mean?
What I see is the Liberals promote this as basically as a panic situation. It's a climate emergency. We have to act now. We don't have time to really properly,
analyze.
Have questions asked. Yeah, analyze. And by the way, this is the second panic situation that they've pulled. The first was the COVID, which I agree was an emergency and everything. But this closing down of what should be open discussions about are we doing the right thing, I don't think is good for us as a country. And I think in the case of the tomatoes, that example you gave where, hey, because it's kind of a panic, we've got people running around saying we've got to eliminate greenhouse gases. So there's a tomato growing facility that puts CO2 in the air in the greenhouse. We got to eliminate that without actually looking at the question you raised. Well, what's the environmental impact of transporting Mexican tomatoes across an entire continent? Maybe you're worse off, right?
Very true. Same as electric vehicles. We need a total assessment. Okay, electric vehicles, they perhaps there's fewer emissions, etc. But what kind of emissions are we talking about in order to make the cars, and in particular the batteries? Extra mining, extra equipment, a lot of it burning diesel fuel, etc. So you're right. We need an analysis here to get the whole picture, not just part of the picture, the whole picture. And when it comes to tomatoes, it's very clear that not only is it harming local production, but it's harming the environment. It's no question. And the same with imported oil. I mean, if you bring oil in from Saudi Arabia, it's got to be shipped all the way across the ocean. You don't think there are a lot of emissions from the tankers bringing it over here? Of course there are. So are there emissions if you are shipping it through a pipeline? There are no emissions from a pipeline. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. What I see as the most the worst part of this actually is when you declare these emergencies. It was with COVID, and now it's with greenhouse gases and everything, global warming gases.
Yep.
The purpose is really to shut conversation down, and I think in my opinion, the Liberals have had a bad habit of doing that. They kind of come across as being open to listening, but actually they're completely the opposite. Most of their effort is put into shutting down conversations. They've prorogued Parliament. They've taken the Speaker of the House to court.
You know where else? Let me just jump in here. You know where else? You know where else this is being applied right now? The whole question of Indigenous rights and compensation. Debate is being shut down totally. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the debate is like we live in a democracy. We have the House of Commons. This is where the debate should be happening. It should be a fruitful debate. I understand it's politics, But to be honest, as one voter, I can tell you I'm really tired of canned answers that are not answering questions. In my opinion, if you've got an idea, that's fine. Go for it. Fly it up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes. But please be able to defend your idea and listen to other people's opinions.
You got it.
Really a degraded public discussion, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you've added to the discussion greatly. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate it. John, what have we got next here?
I always love when Paul calls. So insightful. Paul,
yeah, he's good. He's very insightful. Yep. He pays attention. Paul pays attention.
Yep. And Paul, I really should add your phone number so that the next time you call, I know exactly that it's you. I got to start doing that, building the bank.
By the way, I wouldn't mind some conversation. I feel that the same pressure on us not to debate, question, or analyze the entire Indigenous situation. I think that I think that is a growing problem as well. We have been told about all of the deaths and so-called at the residential schools, and it may be true. But to this point, as far as I know, there have been no exhumations. We don't know, are those really bodies in there? And I'd like to know why. But it's, to debate this, to question this, it's a very dangerous thing these days, particularly politically. Go ahead, John.
Paul sounds like a very sensible caller, says Jim. Paul from Canada, you are 100% correct, says Kelvin. You hit the nail on the head. Great call, says Chrissy. All right. Good call, Paul, says Mike. It's ridiculous how they throw money left and right at these things without doing their homework first. Meanwhile, we need money for much more important things. It doesn't matter how much Canada charges in carbon tax. It won't do a damn thing to the climate with countries like India and China. How many times have we said this and they still don't get it?
Very true. Very true.
Rick is on Facebook. The available picture will only be as clear as the tax collectors want you to see it. Kellyanne, back to you. Exactly. The fact that our cost of living is higher makes it even more a shame that the government is putting the carbon tax on our local farmers. It's punishing them for being efficient and using CO2 as a fertilizer to help grow our food.
Actually, in the end, it punishes the farmers, but when the farmers are punished, so are we.
Absolutely.
We're punished every time we go to the grocery store these days. Go ahead.
Woodenhead is on YouTube. In mining cobalt much different than oil exploration from an environmental standpoint? Sorry, is mining cobalt much different than oil exploration from an environmental standpoint?
Well, one of the problems, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of this, there's so much misinformation. But my understanding is that some of the minerals required for batteries for electric cars, that some of these minerals are being mined by children in various African countries. Right. I don't know if it's true or not. We see an increasing number of stories, but there is no question that there must be a considerable amount of emissions from the mining operations. It's impossible to mine without emissions. I mean, the equipment that's used to mine, et cetera, and the transportation of these minerals all create emissions. And I just don't think that many of those are being factored in. I just think, and Paul is right, they create a panic situation. Here's the panic. We've created the panic, and we're the only ones who can provide the solution to the panic. It's a great, great political opportunity. Go ahead, John.
About a week or so ago, we aired on this very program a question that somebody had asked of 3 mayoral candidates, Catherine McKenney included, regarding purchasing electric buses when these batteries are known to contain ingredients mined by children. And it really threw a number of the candidates off, especially one Catherine McKenney.
Yeah, I mean, they just haven't thought about it. That's all.
Text 613-413-2217. So if Suntech purchased carbon dioxide from a company, then scrubbed it out of the air, or even bought their own machine, would Trudeau still charge them a carbon tax, this person asks?
Yeah, he said that's exactly what's happened. Of course. They scrub it out of the air with the plants. Very true. That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, the tomato plants scrub the CO2 out of the atmosphere. I mean, the Suntech did not create the CO2. CO2 is created elsewhere. So they buy the CO2 in canisters and they release it as a fertilizer. The plants scrub it out of the atmosphere. So in fact, he should be rewarded for that. Instead of having to pay a tax on it, it should get rewarded for scrubbing some of the CO2 out of the atmosphere. Go ahead.
Just a couple of moments left on the show. We'll go to Rick. They are only concerned with increasing the tax take. Murray in Saskatchewan, haven't had a chance to get one of your many comments in, Murray. Here you go. Every decade they give you a new scam and people suck it up, he says. Anne is on Facebook. She says the trouble is the Trudeau Liberals do not look at the overall impact of anything. Their brain seems to shut off at the word emissions and go down some illogical, weird path that illustrates the overall environmental impact does not matter to them. Could it be because their goal is to cut emissions in this country, not caring of the global emissions? If you care about emissions, that is illogical and not very scientific.
It's a very good point. If you want to see blank stares when some of these questions are raised, just have a look at the Liberal side of the House when a question like Suntech tomatoes is raised. You could see them all just staring blankly. I'm not even sure if some of those Liberals know what the hell a tomato is. Thank you all. We're out of time here. Back tomorrow.
The Lowell Green Show is seen and heard live around the world at 2 p.m. Eastern. Connect with us online at blasttheradio.com/Lowell Green. Can't join us live? Download the Lowell Green podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, Google, and more. Ask your smart speaker to play the Lowell Green podcast. This is a production of blasttheradio.com.